Hello everyone, welcome to Heard Over the Piano. My name is Shannon McGinnis. I am the Director of Education for Collaborative Arts Institute of Chicago, and I'm excited to be with you tonight to share with you some news about some exciting educational programs that we have coming up in the 2021-22 season, all of which will be live and in person if all goes according to plan. So everyone do your part to make sure that that can happen. We're very much looking forward to being able to be back together in person in the upcoming season. Before I introduce our wonderful guests for this evening, I need to let you know that we are pre-recording tonight's episode. So normally we would invite you to pop some questions and comments in the chat, and we would engage with those in real time during our conversation. Unfortunately, we won't be able to do that tonight. However, I do encourage you, if you have questions or comments, you can absolutely pop them into the Facebook chat tonight, and we will do our best to engage with those in the chat. Unfortunately, I just don't have a time machine. I won't be able to go back and incorporate them into our conversation. I also would encourage you, if you have more substantive questions about the educational programming that's coming up this season, if you would like to contact me through the CAIC website, you can absolutely do that as well, and I'll be sure to be back in touch with you with answers to those questions in due course. So I'm thrilled this evening. I want to not spotlight myself anymore. Here we are with Zoom. Thrilled this evening to introduce the wonderful and one and only Dr. Lynn Eustis, who is an acclaimed soprano, a voice teacher, educator, and an author. She is currently the Director of Graduate Studies at Boston University. Her students have been heard all over the country and all across the world in major venues and with really important arts organizations and opera companies as well. I've had the great pleasure of knowing Lynn for many, many years, more years than I will divulge here. I first met her when we were both students at Florida State University. She was a doctoral student. I was a master's degree student. She was famous on campus not only for her wonderful singing, but for her inspired and really sophisticated teaching. She was quite a fine teacher at that time in her career, and still continues to be. And then I've gone on to work with Lynn quite closely and for a number of years, and find her to be just an incredibly empathic, organized, systematic teacher with a wealth of information that is pedagogically sound and inspired, but also quite artistically driven and inspiring as well. It's just a perfect synthesis of both of those attributes, and I admire it so much. And Lynn, you know, I always tell you how much I learn just from being in the room with you. And so I'm really excited to have you with us tonight, and also excited to tell our audience about what we've cooked up for next season. So welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, and thank you for that super kind introduction. I learned from being in the same room as you too, Shannon.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that very much. Lynn and I enjoy working together very much. We call ourselves, you know, a lot of people have a good cop, bad cop relationship, and we jokingly refer to ourselves as bad cop, because we're both we're both kind of rather disciplined, and we expect a lot, but we have a good time. Absolutely. So Lynn, before I kind of tell everyone what the plan is for next season, I thought we would just kind of get to know you a little bit. You were with us on a previous Heard Over the Piano episode that we entitled Silver Linings to Online Learning. It was a wonderful panel discussion about all that we've gone through this past year and kind of the takeaways from our experience of moving our teaching and interactions to a remote platform. And we were also the benefit of your expertise in a masterclass in, was it 2019? It seems like so long ago. And so some of our audience members had the opportunity to participate in that masterclass with you, or perhaps to be in the audience. And it really was, I had been wanting to bring you here for quite some time and was glad that we were able to make that happen. And it was really in that moment of kind of watching you work with our participants and thinking about, how can we get Lynn here more frequently? How can we have her have a stronger presence here in Chicago in our organization, that I really kind of dreamed up this idea of having you do a longer residency here. And so that's what we'll talk about a little bit coming up. But before we do that, tell us a bit about kind of your, I mentioned that I met you at Florida State University. You were a doctoral student were you a performance major or were you a pedagogy? Remind me what your specific program was.
Sure. My major, I was actually an opera performance major. Well, voice performance with an emphasis in opera, I think was the actual title of it. So yes, so not pedagogy at all. There wasn't really much of a pedagogy program there.
Yeah, I couldn't remember if there was, but within that, so you had a graduate assistantship that had you interacting with students, right? So you had, tell us a little bit about that.
12 students a week.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which is actually, ironically, the same number I have now because of my load release for being director of graduate studies in music. So it was a pretty full studio, and I learned quite a lot from doing that. I was also really lucky because they had an odd number of voice teachers on the faculty at that time, and so when they would split up the jury rooms, they needed an extra person, and Professor Delp was usually very kind about inviting me to be that person. So that was a great experience, just getting an eye view into what it was going to be like to be a full-time faculty member.
When you began your doctoral work, did you have an eye toward teaching in the future? Or was your eye more toward performing? How did teaching and performing kind of work together for you at that point in your training?
Sure. So I went back for the doctoral degree for the specific purpose of teaching at the university level. I had at that point, in my undergrad is from Bucknell University, and from there I did a master's degree at the Curtis Institute of Music, which in opera, which was, of course, all about performance. And I sang professionally for about 5 years between the two programs, between Curtis and Florida State. And during several of those years, I toured with a small opera company, which is now, it was called the National Opera Company, but now it's the Fletcher program at the School of the Arts in Winston-Salem. But it was
North Carolina.
Right. And at that point, when I was in it, it was a standalone company, and we had benefits. We toured all over the place. We went into schools, and and also did evening performances. We did a wide variety of things. I sang a lot of great roles there. I did Daughter of the Regiment with them. I did Gretel with them. Adele and Fledermaus, more performances than I can possibly count. And it was a great experience. And then when I was through with that, I moved to New York, and I was temping and not teaching for the first time in my life. Didn't have any teaching component to what I was doing. And that I missed it terribly. And I was towards the end of my time in New York, I was in a production of Ariadne auf Naxos, and I was doing Naiad, and I was covering Servinetta, and I was in a complete panic when they called me one night and said, "But guess what? Tomorrow night is a dress rehearsal at Servinetta." And I freaked out. I was, oh my God. And, I should have been so happy about that, but I couldn't sleep. I couldn't wait for it to be over. And I just thought, this doesn't have to be my life. And I love singing and I love performing, but I desperately missed teaching, and I certainly didn't want to give it up for, the lifelong stress of just worrying about my voice every day and all of that. And my teacher at the time said to me, she said, you don't love the spotlight. And I sort of stood there and said, you're right. I don't. So I really, really don't. And there are so many people who do. I love the process, but I don't love the walk out on stage part nearly as much as a lot of my more successful performing colleagues do. I think that's necessary. So I didn't look back. I applied like that month for doctoral programs, and I went to Florida State with that specifically in mind. And I really thought, well, I'm just done with performing. I'm done growing as a singer. I'm here to get a piece of paper. And that just really wasn't how it worked out, because I had a teacher who just who kicked my you know what, and and then also a director who really pushed me hard to be better. And I learned so much, and I feel like I left as a much stronger performer. And towards the end of that time, I won a big well, maybe a medium-sized competition, the Suncoast Opera Guild. And I entered that competition specifically to win money to pay the microfiche fees so I could graduate from the program. And I was fortunate, I won, and I could pay my fees and graduate. But, and some of the judges said, "Well, you're going to go back to New York now, right?" And I said, "There's no way. This is for me the right combination of things: teach and sing." And I knew I always wanted to write, and that has come to pass too. So for me, I love having the balance of all the different things that I get to do now. I teach, I do administration, I do write, I do sing. It's and I'm largely in control of the proportions of those things. So that's been great for me.
Absolutely. I want to go back quickly, just a little side note about the National Opera Company, now the Fletcher Opera Institute. The National Opera Company at the time is responsible for my very first experience with opera. I grew up in a very small town in North Carolina, and they came, as you said, they came to the school where I was, and I wish I could remember what the production was. I should, but I remember just being so excited by the costumes and the singing and the orchestra, and so it's really amazing that organizations like that existed at that level at that time, really doing that work of going into the schools. It's quite amazing. I wanted to also kind of go back to something that you said about, because you write about this in your books so eloquently, and we're going to talk in more detail about your books as well. But about the importance, in your words, of, as a performer, really being comfortable and enjoying the spotlight at a certain level. And I'm sure you've had this conversation, I've heard you have this conversation with students, and I certainly have it with my students as well, with certain students feeling that there isn't room for the more introverted performer, right, in our industry. And I wonder if you have thoughts about that.
Yes.
Yeah, let's get started.
All right. Yeah, my first book, The Singer's Ego, was largely about this, and the subtitle is Finding Balance Between Music and Life. And I started writing that book while I was teaching in my first major teaching job at University of North Texas, where I was observing some of the more seasoned teachers and seeing what they were telling their kids about confidence, and the things like, you have to always believe you're the best one in the room. And that doesn't hold water for me, because at some point you're going to be in lots of rooms where you're not the best person. So what do you do then? Pretend that you are? I mean, it's a tricky thing. So how do you figure out what is special enough about you to feel like you can walk out there and have something to say that no one else can say? I mean, you are the instrument when you're a singer, and that is a really tricky thing. And you have to deal with text, and that's also a tricky thing. So for me, one of the ways that I eventually made peace with the need to walk out onto stage, even though I still am a quite introverted person. For me, it was just recognizing that my voice, I'm the only person who has my voice and my life experiences and my way of interpreting the poetry or the text or whatever else, and that there's never going to be another me. And I think that's really important. So I've really focused a lot of my teaching on helping people understand what is truly special about them as singers. What are, not to be cocky or conceited about it, but what are the things that you do that help you stand out? I learned that at Curtis and to a large degree, because they gave us great audition advice back then, that you had to find the thing that was special about your voice and make sure that that's in the first line of whatever you are auditioning with, because we have that immediate, subjective, visceral reaction to a voice when we hear it. And it's hard to change that impression, which is, it's hard to hear that sometimes too, but it's, you react to a voice in a certain way. So they identified for me that they felt like my calling card as a singer was my float, my high float. So they would have me start with Caro Nome because Gualtier Malde is just up there and like, bam, there it is in the first line. This is the thing that I do. So I've tried to identify that with my students. And, you know, when I do perspective lessons, it's so interesting because I always ask every time after I hear them sing a little bit of something, I ask every single student at all levels, what are the things that you love about your singing? And what are the things that you most want to change about it? And people 99.9% of the time go right to, well, my top isn't this, or I don't have a big voice, or, you know, they go to the negatives right away. And it's sometimes really hard to get people focused on what is the thing that you really love? What's that thing that makes you think I should walk out on this stage and someone should pay money to sit in an uncomfortable chair for 2 hours and listen to me? So, you know, it's not wrong to figure out what those things are and capitalize on them. And then of course work on the other things. So that's one approach that I take with my students. I also take the approach of recognizing that the music is bigger than we will ever be. If we're doing our jobs right, you know, this music will be sung for hundreds of years after we're all pushing up the daisies. I always get emotional talking about it, but it's like, it's a true thing. Like that's something, again, I learned that a little bit at Curtis because I think conservatories do that really well, because it really, at a conservatory, especially one like Curtis, it was never about, you know, trying to make yourself look great or trying to make you famous or make you this or that. It was really like, here's some music up here, and if you work hard enough, you'll be good enough to take care of it for a little while till you pass it on to the next generation, which is, it's a nice way to think about it. I mean, it felt daunting at the time. I'm not gonna lie about that. It was a hard place to go to school in some ways, but it taught me a true respect for the music, that it was never going to be about me. It was always going to be about the music. And when I am able to stay with that idea, when I walk out on stage and I'm feeling nervous and I'm thinking about, why is that person yawning in the fourth row? And, you know, oh, there's my mom, or, you know, is they're live streaming. Oh my God, who's watching this? You know, it's when you're thinking about all those things, or you're seeing some iconic piece, you know, I've had the great fortune to go out and sing some really, really iconic works. I mean, Lucia di Lammermoor, Rosina and Barbara Seville. I mean, some of these things, you know, moments on stage where you're about to sing the Lucia Mad Scene, or you're about to sing the Act 4 finale in Marriage of Figaro. I mean, these moments that you're just like, oh, I'm so lucky that I get to be in the club to sing this. And you can think about it as like, oh my God, I'm not going to be as good as you know, the hundreds of other, thousands of other Lucias out there, or Susannas, or anybody else. Or you can think, I'm in the club, I get to sing this, and I want to put my stamp on it so that someone else will get inspired by that and want to sing it themselves and carry it on. So when I'm able to put the music first, I don't have time to think about all those other irrelevant things. You know, I sometimes call it terrorist chatter. You know, you want to just tune that out. It doesn't. Most of that is not relevant. Doesn't mean anything. So you know, it's just stuff that's going through your mind while you're singing. But if you're really thinking about breathing with intention and singing with the idea of what you want to say with these words and this phrase and this note, and you've done your homework, you're thinking about that when you go out on stage. I mean, think about your favorite singers. I mean, even some of the ones with the just God-given instruments that are just incredibly moving just on their own without them interpreting anything, that gets boring after about 10 minutes. And if they don't have something really great to say, they don't, even the best instruments don't hold my interest. I don't think they hold most people's interest. I think most people who are having huge careers as singers have a lot to say and are confident enough in themselves and in their instruments to go out and say it. You know, some of my favorite singers, it feels like they're composing while they're singing. And I watched that. I think that's the gold standard. That's what I strive to do, and I fail miserably most of the time. But I try to. No, it's true. But I try to, you know, stay focused on what I'm trying to say. And so now when I'm singing, I pick music that means a great deal to me. And I also, with my students, I try to make sure that they, you know, one of my favorite things to do repertoire wise with students is hand out about 3 times as much repertoire as we're ever going to do. And just, you look at all of this and you come back with some of these things. Bring 2 pieces next week, or bring, you know, start identifying what moves you and what poetry moves you. We start every studio class by reading a poem, and you know, I pick the poems, but I try to do a wide variety of them so they can start understanding what what speaks to them and what doesn't. Because you're not going to sing everything. And in school, you're taught you have to learn every style and every language and every piece that was ever written for your voice, and that's not always true. And as soon as you get out in the professional world, it's really more about what do you sing more effectively than a lot of other people, or what is most, what moves you to get to go out there, what gives you the drive to continue to want to do this, because this is hard work, singing, really hard work. I don't know if that answers your question. I was a little
It's beautifully said, and I think it gives our audience a beautiful insight into who you are as a teacher and some of the questions that you bring into the room, right? And the conversation that you bring into the room with your students. And one of the things I really appreciate about what you just said is something that I think is increasingly important to our students, is the understanding that the repertoire requires something, right? It requires a certain amount of care, and that is what we must put in the forefront. But we also have to bring ourselves into the room, right? And in order to bring ourselves, we have to know who we are and what it is we wish to say. And so I really appreciate how you talk about that, and how, in my experience with your work, that you really are building the complete artist. That's what you're endeavoring to do with your students, right? That it's more than just someone who's executing a job, right, vis-a-vis a particular repertoire assignment, but you're building the voice and the person, the artist.
I try really hard to do that, in large part because as a young singer, I was able to do things very easily, technically, and I hid behind that for a long, long time. I mean, we did Candide in my high school. I sang that. I sang Cunegonda as a senior, and I have a video of it, which is hilarious. And every now and then at studio party, my students convince me to pull that out so they can see it. And I'm not communicating basically anything, but I stand by the singing. I could sing that thing when I was 17, which was crazy. But I got away with not communicating because people were just, I was just able to do, I was lucky, I was able to do a lot of things technically. And so it took me way too long to start figuring out how to successfully integrate what was in here with what was coming out to the audience. And and it's never been that I didn't feel the things. It was just really hard to get it out there. I mean, one story I always tell on myself. It's in the book. It's in the first book. There was a time at Curtis where we were doing the Rose and Cavalier trio, and that piece, it's an incredible piece, and what an honor to get to sing that. And we were singing it one day, and I was having a day. I was just having a day of like you do. And we got to the end of the trio, and it was just so moving. I lost it entirely. I started bawling, and they didn't stop, and we had to go on and sing the duet after that. And they didn't stop. And my beautiful Octavian came over and just put her arm around me, and she sang the duet by herself while I stood there crying. And then we left. And like, no one said anything. And because this was, the late 80s, you didn't talk about stuff then. And, no one said anything. And then later that summer, I was at a summer program with the coach who had been there that day. And she brought up that day, and I was, oh God, I was so embarrassed. And she looked at me, she said, no, that's the day that we knew that you were an artist. We were starting to worry about you, that you didn't feel it. I'm like, no, I felt it too much. Didn't know how to communicate it, because sometimes I say to my students that being an effective artist is really about taking what's here and getting it out there. And that's hard to do. It doesn't mean you don't have those things here and here, but just figuring out the best and most efficient way to get that out to where people are. It's hard to do, but there are ways to figure it out. And that's where I try to help my students figure it out sooner than I did, because I was honestly, it really wasn't until I got to Florida State that I really had people really help me with that. And there were lots of people that tried, but people were still, especially when I could sing Serenata and I could sing some of these things, people were sort of willing to give me a pass as a young singer. But you get to a point where potential is a 4-letter word, you have to actualize that at some point. And I didn't actualize it until I was in my 30s, probably.
I mean, artistry is a skill, right? Just
Yeah.
like anything else. And we have to be ready also to do it, right, and to learn what those skills are and implement them. But it is very much a skill. And very often it's kind of left in this sort of nebulous kind of category. You're either an artist or you aren't, and I think that's unfortunate, right? We can teach artistry, and that's what we should do.
We can. There are always going to be people who are on one. Well, we're all more towards one side or the other.
Mhm.
We're all more towards the technique side or the artistic side, but we all need both sides. And some of it is just recognizing which thing you are. And I'm always upfront about, I'm not going to be the teacher who just tells you about your hypothyroid and close that eval more and I'll see and make sure that's loud and we're done. Like that's just not going to be what. This is not ever going to be who I am as a teacher. And the singers who are looking for that, there's plenty of that in our field, and there's hopefully plenty of the other side as well. But.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, this is a good time to give a little bit more context to what we'll be doing next season, I think, since I think you've introduced yourself and your teaching quite beautifully and eloquently. So the plan is we have schemed, you and I, to create a series of weekend-long workshops. I've been describing them kind of as weekend retreats even, over the course of the season. All of the information and the dates for these upcoming workshops and masterclasses are available on our website as of today. When this broadcasts, it will be Thursday, and the website will launch that day. We're beginning in November, and that will be our first weekend. And in January, we have a second weekend. And in March, we have our third and final weekend. And what we're doing is inviting a cohort of 15 singers, master's degree level and above, and teachers of singing to join us for these retreats that will begin with book discussions, and we're going to talk a little bit more about your 3 wonderful books. With book discussions, private lessons for a group of 5 each weekend, so we're kind of breaking things up that way so that the singers get real individualized attention, and then culminating each weekend in a master class that will feature the 5 performing participants for that weekend. So 15 singers total, and who will attend each weekend, spotlighting 5 singers who will have private lessons and perform over the weekend. So that's sort of the construct of this masterclass and workshop series. And we've organized it over 3 weekends because I really wanted Lynn to have an opportunity to share the insights that she writes so beautifully about in each of her 3 books that really kind of, and Lynn, please jump in here and kind of refine this for me, but I feel like these 3 books really spotlight different aspects and pivotal points in your career, both as an artist and as a teacher and as a human. And I don't know that I've ever been in the room when you have the book discussions with singers. One thing I've admired about your relationship with singers through your books and sharing your life experience is that you feel that it's a very intimate conversation speaking with singers about this journey. And so we've talked about the experience of sharing those words with singers, but I've not ever really been in the room. But I know from singers who have had the benefit of being with you in those conversations, how meaningful and personal those conversations have been. And so I'm really excited about the opportunity here to build a little community here in Chicago that gives a group of singers the chance to be together in community, which we all have really been missing over this past year, and to really talk about things that are specific to the lives of singers and teachers of singing. And so can you talk a little bit more? You've talked, I think, quite a bit about your first book, which is The Singer's Ego, that you wrote. There it is, ta-da-da. I should mention that as our website launched today, that links to these books for sale are available on our website as well. So I would encourage everyone who would like to attend the workshop or even just who is interested in Lynn's work to visit our website and go purchase the books because they're all three wonderful. So, Singer's Ego, tell us about it a little bit.
Oh yeah, so I wrote this. It came out in 2005. There it is again, BBC. And I wrote it in large part for myself to organize my own thoughts about confidence. And I was getting into arguments with people about why are singers so neurotic. And there's when you are the instrument, it's hard to not be a little bit. It's just different. It's a different way to relate to your artistry because you can't ever just put that thing in a case and go out and do whatever you're going to do. Um, I've done a lot of workshops. It came out in 2005, as I said, and I've done lots and lots of talks about it for all different types of groups. Um, the situation that you were referring to, Shannon, was when we taught at the Up North Vocal Institute, our students. I usually did the talk with the students only because we had almost as many teachers and staff members as we did students, and some of them, their own teacher would be in the room, and it's a little bit tricky to talk about, to really speak freely about these personal issues with your teacher sitting there sometimes. And I've always felt sorry for my own students who were in the room and I could hopefully still felt okay about speaking freely. But it was really just to organize how I wanted to talk with my own students and of course with myself about confidence. And then I did in 2010, I was invited by Alan Henderson to be a presenter at like a headline speaker at the National Nats Conference which was in Salt Lake City that year. And I did 3 sessions about the book, and it was of course for an audience of voice teachers and coaches. So it was really interesting. And of course my ulterior motive there was to gather intel and ideas about book number 2, which is The Teacher's Ego, When Singers Become Voice Teachers. And of course, that you can make an endless number of jokes about the frying pan and into the fire and all of that. This book was really about it was about making sure that you don't bring your own issues as a singer into the teaching studio. In The Singer's Ego, I talk a lot about developing your what I call vocal ego, the positive things that are good about yours that stand out about your singing, and the things that you're still working on, and the pieces of it that reflect you in a positive way. And if you become a voice teacher and you have not figured those things out, it's going to get tricky in the studio. Um, and we all know about the major categories of voice teachers. One category is the kind that went out and had a huge singing career, and then when that started to wind down, let's find a school to teach at for the last 10 years or so of my career. And that model sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. Another model that sometimes works and sometimes doesn't is going straight through school, straight through bachelor's, master's, DMA, teach. Sometimes that's a problem too. I feel very lucky that I had the 5 years that I had outside to try to do it myself, because I've been asked at numerous interviews not numerous, but the few interviews I did for university jobs before and that got me to where I am now. I was always asked, what do you have to offer a young singer who's about to go to New York? And one of the things I always say is I went there myself and I know what's involved, and I know why I left, and I know what they're going to need to be there. And that's been enormously helpful to me in my teaching career to see that. Anyway, The Teacher's Ego was really about trying to organize those thoughts about what it was like how you can be a more effective voice teacher if you have figured out your own reasons for doing it. Because I think the reason that you are a teacher is one of the most important factors in how successful you are going to be, and how on a humane level, how successfully you will reach your students and change their lives. Because it's not really just about imparting information, it's about a lot more than that. And I had a really hard time writing this book because the first book, I write in a very anecdotal and personal way. And that was one thing when I was writing about my own experience as a singer, and my students at UNT, where I was when I wrote both of these books, they looked at chapters of The Singer's Ego. If there were stories I was telling about a particular student, I would send that student that section and say, look, I'm not using your name, but anyone who was here around that time is going to be able to figure out who you are. So I wanted to make sure that you're okay with that. And when I started writing the teacher's ego, there are lots of stories you can't tell. I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to say things about my colleagues in writing that are not positive. I'm not going to say anything ever about a teacher, and any teacher of mine, that isn't positive, because those teachers, every one of them, I learned something from every one of them. They all tried their best to give me something that they thought would help me. So I will never say anything negative about my teachers or other voice teachers in writing in a specific way. So I couldn't lay out my ideas and then tell the stories in every case. And I was sort of stalled out. And one of my friends, who's not a musician at all, said, why don't you just write the book you want to write and then go back and take out the stuff that you just don't want to say. And so that's what I did. So when I read it, it feels to me like there's stuff missing, but I know that other people who have read it don't know that that's missing, and it's just what it is. So this book came out in 2012. I had just started at BU when it came out, which was great. And then should I go on to the other book or keep going with this? Um, the
Yeah.
third and hopefully not final book, but the third final for today, A Singer's Epiphany, on faith, what did I subtitle? We went back and forth so many times. Faith, Music, and Mortality. And this came out just in October of 2020. This one was a long time coming and had to do with a diagnosis I received, which isn't secret anymore. It hasn't been secret for a long time. I was diagnosed with a brain tumor back in 2014, and I'm so lucky. I'm knocking on wood right now. Still here. Everything's great. But I went through surgery and treatment, and it was a tough thing. So, and I started writing this book not long after the diagnosis. But then I got a second diagnosis of what turned out to be a benign abdominal tumor. So it's just been kind of a ride. That happened in 2017. So the book ended up taking a little bit longer to write, because really my thesis of the book is how the diagnosis of the brain tumor really improved my life and made my life more meaningful. It's kind of a cliche, but it's not. I mean, at the end, as it turns out, it's not. It made things clearer for me. And the second diagnosis, I had to sort of, felt it was hard to sort of feel like things were better when I got a second diagnosis. So I had to really just kind of live with that for a little bit. And then it's still been true that it's all enriched my life. It's made me appreciate things more. I could never have gotten through this pandemic without having already been through something that was, for me, worse, and for me, scarier. And the lesson I learned, of the many lessons I learned, but one was about living with uncertainty. I learned when you have a brain tumor and it left fingers in your brain and they couldn't take it all, you have to figure it out, how to not wake up every day thinking, oh my God, I have a brain tumor. So, I have really grown a lot because of that. And when this happened, and it's been super uncertain, and thankfully it's starting to become less and less uncertain, but that uncertainty didn't seem quite as frightening to me as it likely would have if I hadn't been through this. So I felt like that both made it easier for me, but also made it easier for me to be there for my students and to help them look for the things they were going to take away from this, and let them grieve for the things they lost and the things that will forever be different for them because of this, but also look at the things that will be forever different for them because of this. They'll be resilient in a way that they were not before. They just will. So.
Yeah, it's again beautifully stated and so insightful that pandemic notwithstanding, major illnesses notwithstanding, uncertainty is just part of the game, right? In the life that we live, I mean, as human beings, but as artists and people trying to carve a path in a very difficult career. That uncertainty is something we carry with us all of the time. And have not had a chance yet to read this most recent book, but I'm looking forward to it very much, and so glad to have your perspective and appreciate so much your vulnerability and your honesty, and I hope it doesn't sound trite to say your courage and bravery in really sharing what was such a personal experience. We're really fortunate to have your voice on this.
I
So
appreciate
thank
that
you.
so much. I mean, the main reason I wrote this book was because I didn't see this book on the shelf. I'm that person who goes and reads about things when I when I want to know more about a situation. And I was looking right after the diagnosis for books by brain tumor survivors and not really finding too many of them on the shelf. Lots of books written by people who lost loved ones to brain tumors. And yes, I read all of those in the process of this, and that was a hard thing, but it was a thing I needed to do. And that also delayed the completion of this book, because it just sometimes you have to just sit with what you've just read. But I wrote the book that I wanted to be on the shelf for someone else. I want someone else who's newly diagnosed to be able to find this, which hopefully they will, because GIA has sold it to an independent publishers group, which is why if you look for it on Amazon right now, you won't see it there till September 1st, but you can buy it right now on GIA's website. But it's going to have a broader distribution, and I'm really, really happy about that, because I wanted people to be able to find it. And I do go into some detail about how it all went down, how it really was. And so I've definitely had some people who are very close to me say that once they started reading it, they just blew right through it. They couldn't put it down, but also that parts of it were hard. For people who know me very well, like, there are going to be parts that are hard. So be warned, Shannon.
I'll make sure that I carve out the appropriate quality of time, right, to really be
It
able
turns
to
out
sit.
okay. You know how it ended. It turns out okay.
It all ended well. And, I was, of course, we were seeing each other a little bit more frequently at the time that this was all kind of happening. That the first diagnosis was very recent when we first started working together. And then the second diagnosis, I just remember, and I said this to you, how much can a person take on it was just really unbelievable. You couldn't catch a break. Again, use the most trite language possible. It's just unbelievable. And the grace with which you dealt with all of it and have continued to deal with it is just really remarkable and inspiring to me personally.
You just, sometimes people say, "Oh, you're so brave," and I always say, "You don't know how you're going to be until this happens to you." And what am I going to do? Cry all the time? And, I mean, there have definitely been some days that I was really, especially after the second diagnosis, that was really hard to take. And I said right away to my sister that I was nostalgic for the days when all I had to worry about was a brain tumor. So that was it was a little bit much, and I'm still sometimes nostalgic for that. Although we're coming up on 5 years. This January, it'll be 5 years for the other thing. So that will, you get to walk away a little bit after that. There's no walking away from the brain tumor. They're always going to look at that, and it's going to be a thing. But you just learn to do it, because what else are you going to do?
I liked you talked about the clarity that this experience brought to your life as well. And just relating back to the pandemic, I'm sure you had this experience as well with the number of students and young students that I had that said that this difficult year forced them to step back and think with much more intention about what they wanted their lives to be like. And I'm talking about my first and second year undergraduate students that were thinking in this way. And it's just really, it says a lot about, and we throw around the word resilience, and I don't want to be careless about that, but a person's ability to really think forward and to move forward with optimism and clarity and intention, and how important that is. And one's ability to take that away from a difficult experience really says a lot about us as humans, that we're able to do that. It's really amazing.
Definitely. There's a chapter in this book called Students, which was added after the first draft because my wonderful publisher, Alec Harris, he asked for this chapter because he said he wanted to know more about how it changed my teaching. And a central question he wanted me to answer was, did it make me more or less patient with my students? And I think patience is an enormous skill that we've all had to learn during the pandemic. And so I think there's it's really hard to overestimate the ability to be patient, because sometimes some things are just not in your control, and that's so difficult. And ultimately my answer to that question in terms of my own teaching was that it's really a bit of both. I feel like I'm much more patient with students who have personal issues, particularly medical issues, but personal ones too. And I'm a lot more patient about giving people a little more room for those things. I'm less patient with people who aren't trying. I'm less patient with because I want you to be excellent now. Why are you, what are you waiting for? It's kind of what I get a little, and I'm not talking about people who are having trouble getting there. That's a different thing entirely. But the people who are just kind of not trying, I'm less patient with that. Mhm. Especially in our career. If you're not going to try, then just don't. Just don't do
Correct.
it.
It's just too hard, right? It's too hard to not do that, right?
Well, and just circling back to what I was saying about respect for the music and just being like, it's about the music and the art form, and you're disrespecting those two things if you're not trying. You just, and not to mention your own talent and all of that. So, I've definitely been a little less patient about that. I'm trying, and not always succeeding, to be less of a perfectionist in terms of my own work in particular, but a little bit with my students. That's, but I want them to be excellent. I want them to know, I want to tell them the truth about what they're doing, and help them to be truthful with themselves, and work on things. Because I don't think you're damaging anyone by being truthful, as long as you're saying it with love and care and providing solutions, which is so important.
Correct. And it's a sign of respect for them as well, of their time, right? You've taken the time, you've taken on a considerable expense in many cases to embark on this career path and on this training. And we as teachers, we as the people charged with kind of shepherding you through this time, we owe it to you to be as honest as possible, right? And again, with love and care and respect for each person's individual situation. But we're not doing anyone any favors by not being honest about what is really required here, right?
Yeah.
Oh, bless you. I had one a moment ago too, and I had to put myself on mute. But my husband and I both caught kind of pretty bad head colds this week, and I feel like it's because we removed our masks and our immune systems went, wait, what's happening, right? We're spending more time outdoors without masks, and so we're over it now, but. I sympathize with the sneezing. I've been doing a lot of that in the past few days. So I think that you have given us so much insight into the types of conversations that our participants can expect to have over our workshop series next season. And we have a little bit of time left still, and I just would love for you to speak a little bit more, if you will, about your approach as a teacher more on the sort of technical side of things. One of the things I admire so much about your teaching is I feel that you have a whole artist approach, which we've talked about, but you also have a very systematic approach. I find your instruction to be very logical and very clearly laid out, and that's sort of the things I really admire. And without giving too much away, or maybe even just talking about why it was important to you in your career, as you began to develop your career as a teacher, to think so systematically and to have a very clear set of guidelines that you're able to impart that are, correct me if I'm wrong, they're universal. That's what I love about them, that they're applicable, right, in different ways to many different types of students and different types of repertoire. So maybe talk about that
You're
philosophy
looking
a
for
little
the
bit.
rules, I'm assuming.
Well, you don't have to say the rules, but I love that you
The
have
rules.
some rules. So
Happy to say the rules.
let's do it.
So the rules were born. They're very simple, and it's not all about just these little rules. But I had a one of my major teachers was the only teacher I've ever had who was super systematic in terms of how she explained everything, and everything was. She had all kinds of concepts that you were supposed to remember. That these were things you were supposed to do, and it was the first and only time in my career as a voice student where I had that explained to me. And but then once I left that teacher, I ended up changing a lot of the information, but it helped me. My next two teachers had better information to give me, but they were less articulate in how they were able to express that to me. But because I'd had this very systematic teacher, I was able to to set up a framework in my own head about what is it they're actually saying to me, and what do I need to know. And that I learned so much more from these other two people than I would have if I hadn't had that first teacher. So in my own teaching, I've really tried to be just systematic about it. So, I always talk about the three rules of Eustis, and there's much more to my teaching than this. I'm making it sound like this is it, but without these things, again, I learned this a little bit teaching out up north all those summers, where we had a week with 5 students, and the next week we have 5 more, and master classes that I've done around, and I've done a lot of master classes at the RCM in London. And in any master class situation, you're trying to figure out what you can help the person with right now. How are you going to get something to shift quickly? And then give them a framework for continuing to shift that. So the pre-rule is always about posture and about standing in a correct body alignment, because if you're not doing that, you are going to be in what I call FEMA duct tape mode, and you're just trying to get the sound to happen however you can. So there's a body alignment piece of this. Rule number 1: you must breathe in with released abs and a high soft palate. I always talk about coming up from being underwater, and you don't go, you go. You open everything and try to allow as much air as possible to come into your bodies, and that's really what you're trying to do when you sing. So we go through the mechanics of how to do that, and often in a perspective lesson I will say, if you learned nothing today other than how to take a really good breath, and you did that sometimes when you sing, that would change a lot of things for you, and it's true, it does. Conversely, if you're not taking a really good breath and then you try to sing, FEMA duct tape mode again. So rule number 2 is you must blow enough air to keep the soft palate up. Of course, if you didn't raise the soft palate in the first place, you are again in FEMA duct tape mode, and you are trying to make the sound however you can. Usually you end up doing it with this. I often talk about breathing in terms of you're breathing into the space in which you plan to sing. So if you're breathing in, you're going to sing right there. If you breathe in, you're going to sing right there. So, you want to find the balance of what is the sound that you're looking for, and how are you going to breathe in a way that will lead to that sound without you having to try every time something different. You're not reinventing the wheel every time you breathe in. Every time you should be doing, it's the same. One of my teachers talked about the tennis serve. So, you want to feel like you've got that serve every time. And then rule number 3, always in parentheses, sometimes about rounding the lips if you need to make those other things happen. So those are the basic rules, and we go from there to a system of vowels and how to think about modifying vowels to support the palate being up and things being in what I call banana land, thinking about starting in the back and sending it out, not just trying to do this, because you can't get over the orchestra if you're doing this. Those brass players will always take you out without even trying. And so you've got to figure out a way to sail up and over them in a focused way. Does that answer what?
It's terrific. It gives our audience kind of a glimpse into how structured but rigid is not at all the right word. That it's a framework around a more nuanced conversation, right? But that these rules are applicable to every repertoire, to every singer, and they're a wonderful place to begin your work. And it's just it's wonderful to see a system that is clear and consistent, so clearly and consistently delivered in your work. I really appreciate it very much and enjoy it. Absolutely. So I just want to give another quick shout out about the masterclass or weekend workshop series that CAIC is presenting in the 2021-2022 season. All of the relevant information about dates and itinerary are published. They're live on the website now. Registration for this event is also now open on the website, and we have an early bird special that is running through June 17th, so I'm getting very salesy now, so be sure to check that out if you're interested in joining us. Again, we're accepting 15 participants who are career-oriented singers, master's degree level and above. And I also think that this workshop would be very appropriate for teachers of singing as well. And so I hope that we'll attract some participants of that nature as well. We are also opening most events to auditors. So even if you do not wish to participate actively, you can come and observe some of the events. Everything with the exception of the private lessons, which will be 100% private. Just Lynn and singer, and a pianist is provided for the master class as well. So please do take a look at the website, and please feel free to reach out if you have any more specific questions about the workshops. We would love to hear from you. Lynn, in the time that we have left, actually, let me make a couple more quick announcements, and then we're going to chat a little bit, but I'll give you a little teaser. We like to close out our conversations by asking the question, why art song? So I know you as someone who has, of course, you've had a wonderful career in opera, but I also know that you are a passionate advocate for the song repertoire, both in your own work and in the work that you do with your students. So I'll let you ponder that one a little bit. Why is it relevant? Why do we need song? And as you ponder, I'll give a couple more announcements. So I'm just going to consult my list here, everyone, and let you know that to stay tuned for our Summer Leader Lounge, which will be broadcast on June 4th at 7 p.m. Central on YouTube, on CAIC's YouTube channel, on Facebook Live, or through our website. The Summer Leader Lounge features mezzo-soprano Kelly O'Connor and pianist Brian Locke, two wonderful friends of CAIC who have been heard both in performance, and I think Brian Locke has played for several of our master classes in the past. Wonderful friends to CAIC, both tremendous artists. I think we have some previews of that concert that will be teased in advance of that. But again, it airs on June 4th at 7 p.m. Central. And so I hope that you'll tune in for that. So and again, registration for the workshop series coming up in 21-22 is also available on the CAIC website now as well. And so as we wrap things up, and I say a tremendous and heartfelt thank you to Lynn Eustis for being with us and sharing her insights about her teaching, about her work with students, about the career in general. Tell us, what is it about song? We are an art song organization. We love song. Tell us about your experience with song. Why do we need it?
I mean, the one word, poetry. I mean, it's really about the poetry for me. And I think the storytelling that on that intimate kind of level, and that's sort of like saying, well, you have a subscription to the symphony, so why chamber music? Well, you know, the intimacy of it is so, when you're singing an art song to an audience, there's even less of a barrier between you and the audience than there is if you're on stage in an opera wearing costume and playing a character. In each song, you are telling your own story as much as you're telling the composer's story. Sometimes I'll tell my students there are four people in the room here. There's you, there's a pianist, there's a composer, and there's the poet, and all four of you are working on this and sharing pieces of yourself in this way. So I love art song. I go crazy for it, especially the older I get and the more I feel confident about interpreting it and about just making choices. I think young singers just panic because it's not so as much about just sheer voice, and you have to scale things to, well, and lots of songs have large scale vocal requirements, but I think it is much more up to you. It's much less obvious. Well, as a young singer, I was always scared of how much I had to be myself in a recital. But actually, I feel like that's my favorite thing about it now, that I can be myself now. My favorite compliment I've ever gotten for a performance of mine was a compliment I got years ago for a recital I did in the Czech Republic. And this old German man came up and said, "Your singing is the mirror of your character." And I thought, I have done it now. Finally, they should feel like they know me a little bit by the end of the recital, and I love that. I sing a recital, I feel heard, I feel known, and I didn't always feel that way in opera, where you're part of you're a small piece of a large picture where you're not in control. The director and the conductor are, and you're being moved around the doll's house, and you're doing the thing, and that's fun, and you're interpreting things yourself too. I'm not dogging opera. I love singing opera too, but in a recital, it's just whatever you want it to be, you and your pianist, and that's really exciting, I think.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much for being with us, Lynn, and I cannot wait to see you in real life
I
in a few months. It's going to be so exciting. I can't wait. We get to hug and share space together, and that's going to be amazing. And really looking forward to having you work with some singers here in Chicago once again. We'll all greatly benefit from your being here, and very much looking forward to it. Thanks for sharing your journey with us and your insights and your wonderful words of wisdom and beautiful perspective. We'll look forward to seeing you in a few months.
Thank you so much for having me. I look forward to coming to
Absolutely.
Chicago.
Thanks, and thanks everyone for tuning in. Please do tune in to the Summer Leader Lounge on June 4th at 7 p.m. Central with Kelly O'Connor and Brian Locke. And we look forward to seeing you all again soon. Bye-bye.